At face value, I look like your average college grad who was over-involved, a good student, social, positive, and a colorful character. During my first couple years of college, I got the reputation for being an innocent girl, funny at times who elicits a positive aura. I was also known for being loyal, wise, and compassionate, but few got to know the real me. Underneath all of those layers, however, there was a shy girl. She was an overthinker, cared way too much about what others thought of her, depressed, anxious, and chronically irritable. She'd also been hospitalized many times for having an eating disorder, which still haunted her. I lived such a controlling life. Eating disorders are all about control. I felt in control by not eating, but really not eating and overexercising was controlling me. I aimed for perfection, and anything short of that was a discrepancy which called for more self-abuse. It came from a place of what I now call self-hatred selfishness. I was so engulfed in myself in a selfish way, yet it came from a place of self-hate. Somewhere along the lines of my eating disorder journey, it was no longer about body image for some reason. It was about the illusion of control my eating disorder gave me. If someone was rude to me or if I did poorly on an exam, I thought, haha, I will get back at you or the world by not eating and over-exercising. Eating disorders, after all, are a silent protest to the forces beyond our control. My eating disorder and anxious tendencies, though, were not easy to hide, and I was reported twice by a couple upperclassmen since they were worried about my unhealthy habits. So even then, my school wasn't involved in it all, which did turn out to be a blessing and a higher power thing, which I'll get to. But it allowed me to find a therapist, psychiatrist, where I was diagnosed with bipolar, ADHD, and depression, too, and a dietitian, which was all helpful. Then I began the journey where I was in recovery and relapse at the same time, which was a bit like trying to push water uphill, not only frustrating but also exhausting. When I didn't eat, my bipolar, ADHD, and depression medicine didn't work since it had nothing to dissolve in, and my manic episodes were all the more worse. I felt like I had a bird brain. And overexercising while not eating made me more depressed and more anxious. I started partnering with never-ending cycles, and although I had a decent social circle, I still felt alone. I eventually was able to find a 12-step fellowship, EDA, or Eating Disorders Anonymous, where I met my soon-to-be sponsor, which is a mentor who helps you work through the steps. I loved the format of the meetings, and there were a lot of people there who gave me hope. Even though I was still engaging in behaviors, Eating Disorders Anonymous, or EDA, and talking to my sponsor really helped me mentally. But somewhere along the lines of my journey, in October of 2019, my restrictive eating disorder, or ED for short, began to transform into another type of ED. My first binge was on Halloween candy, and I was hiding in the back of one of my classes. From there, I started my binge phase, which turned into a form of maybe bulimia, although I was never diagnosed with that, where I would binge and then fast, and then binge, and then overexercise. I gained quite a bit of weight, which caused a lot more depression and anxiety about what other people thought of me, and people started commenting on my body. I looked completely different. It's one thing to look at yourself in the mirror and see a physical change. It's a complete other to have someone walk up to you and say, hey, you look thicker. Now, this complete change in eating disorders was coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic. When COVID first began, I was not in a good place mentally or physically. I hated going back home to Texas. And a little bit of a backstory on that, I just finished my last class at North Central College, which is in the greater Chicago area, and I was a junior when COVID first started, and so home for me was in the Houston, Texas area. So when I went back home, online classes were horrible, and I was missing all of my closest friends. I remember thinking on the plane how in the world they were going to spin this whole pandemic thing at church and on the news. My entire life was out of control, and my eating disorder was running rampant. I remember calling my mom one night crying, hating everything, including my body. I could feel the extra weight on me as I walked, and I hated who I had become, wondering how on earth I had let myself go. I was wondering why God or my higher power put me here with an eating disorder, and why on earth had they allowed this horrible pandemic. Going back to Texas and leaving my beautiful campus and all my friends was up there with one of the all-time lows in my life. It gave me intense anxiety and put my brain into crisis mode. To be sure, this global pandemic breakout was and still is one of the most serious human health crises in a century. In addition to the many and sometimes terrible physical ailments of COVID-19, this nasty virus has also created a public breakout of boredom, high anxiety, loneliness, and depression. I remember going to bed, hoping the next night I would wake up and be back at my school again instead of the Lone Star State. I fantasized that everyone's life and passion for living would be back to normal. Like this was all one big dream or really bad reality TV joke or something. Every day going to Zoom University in my childhood bedroom was not quite how I envisioned ending my junior year. However, those Zoom breakout rooms and Blackboard discussion posts were reminders that I was in fact not alone in this crisis. After hitting lots of walls and finally finishing up the school year, somewhere along the lines of my journey, things changed. With school ending, I had a lot more time, and I went to many virtual Eating Disorders Anonymous meetings where they talked about separating yourself from your eating disorder and anxiety and treating it as an abusive partner. When you are really sick with an eating disorder, you treat it as your higher power. I decided that I needed to name my ed something, and so I came up with the name ed-eb, aka the Eating Disorder Ego Blob. As I started to separate myself from ed-eb, I was able to get more in touch with God, my higher power. Maybe your voice isn't ed or ed-eb, but most of us all have that voice that is self-critical, worries, says you'll never be good enough, and holds you back. I also avidly learned more about the steps. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless, that our lives had become unmanageable. We finally had to admit that what we were doing wasn't working. Step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We started to believe that we could get better and there was a fundamental healing power of which we could rely upon for recovery. I'm not saying you need to believe in a God or spend time making up a higher power, but relying on one is something that really worked for me in my mental health journey. Other ideas of higher powers I have heard as I've gone along includes other people, Mother Nature, the greater good, the universe, divine wisdom, good orderly direction, and the force, among other things. But your higher power, whatever he/she/they/it is, will meet you in your lane. We were on step 2 when I read this life-changing paragraph. Removing our personalities' bad parts so that only goodness remains doesn't work. Insanity cannot be removed. It can only be replaced with something stronger. When we're overworked, we need to develop the willingness that we will be okay even if we work less. When we're scared, we might need the courage to face our fears. We need the clarity to see that what we're afraid of isn't that scary after all. When we feel torn between different options, we need the willingness to choose one and let the others go. When we swing back and forth between extremes, we need balance. All of this takes time and practice. Now, this was a really, really important paragraph in my journey, specifically the line, insanity cannot be removed, only replaced with something stronger. I think we can all agree that having a mental illness, you feel insane sometimes, just all of that negative self-talk, it just feels like insanity. So you might not be able to remove it because all of those insane things are just in the past, but you can replace it with something stronger, and as you do that, it gradually starts to lessen. And you can do this by tapping into your mental toolbox, which is helpful. And there's also the world, which we could talk about as well, because the world, especially the world we live in today, it feels really insane. And so by replacing that with something stronger is really key. And for me, this looks like gratitude, having your eyes and mind set on what we can control and replacing that fear with love. Step 3, make it a decision to turn in our will and our lives over to the care of God or higher power as we understood them, letting go of control. There are different things in life people try to control. For me, it was food and exercise, but for sure, it's not that way for everyone. Maybe it's an addiction, maybe it's worry, maybe it's other people, maybe it's holding on to the past and not letting go of past mistakes, and maybe it's set in a rigid routine or something I have not mentioned. But giving control up to something we believe in that is greater than us is freeing. I learned from my sponsor, T, that the steps are a way of life, a life investment, and she told me how she takes those first 3 daily, admitting powerlessness over the things that we cannot control, and even eating disorder related. Interesting food for thought, no pun intended. The serenity prayer is freeing. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Therapy sessions were also helpful. I see a dance movement therapist who has many words of wisdom to share. She taught me that there are 2 types of thoughts, functional and non-functional, the importance of balance, mindfulness, self-empowerment, and helped me be grateful for everything my body does for me. All this helped me stop binging and restricting. It was then that I started reflecting upon my life and that I realized, for some reason, everything has turned out really good or all right. Every time I was hospitalized for my ed, I came out alive, and I know not everyone is so lucky. Every single rejection put me on a better path, and every decision turned out to be a blessing. Then there started being coincidences, too many, words, events. When I talked to my friend Catherine, she told me that there was no such thing as coincidences, only God incidences. My life was changed. I started praying, and for a solid week, my prayers were answered instantly. Weird, but so cool. Quarantine allowed for lots of soul searching and much help from my mentors, family, and friends. I finally realized that mid last year, in order to be happy, I had to accept the things I could not change and just go with the general flow. Having time to myself and taking one day at a time and dealing with reality as it came to me was helpful as well. These psychological strategies were key to keeping me sane in the second half of 2020 and into 2021, our breakout year. In quarantine, the biggest skill I learned is the power of reframing thoughts. Is the glass half full or half empty? Did this global pandemic happen to us or was it for us? What we look at does not matter. What you see matters most. And calm can coexist with the chaos. By rewiring my brain, and through reframed thoughts, by striving to radiate positivity, be balanced, and remain mindful, I truly was able to, I'm surprised, to make 2020 one of the best years of my life. This sounds pretty radical, I know. But remember, I'm not unique. We all have the power to develop the mental willingness to look at things differently. We have the choice to look at the ominous black rain cloud or the silver lining of life-sustaining rain. Maybe even discern a beautiful rainbow in the sunlight. The way we think goes far beyond COVID. It is more of a valuable life skill. The biggest thing I've heard from my fellows is, when are we going back to normal? How about we reframe that and instead think we will be the new normal? Because there's no going back. I started going to Bible studies with my friend Amy, where I learned a lot more about God and the Bible. And in James chapter 1, verse 1 through 4, and James, one of the 21st epistles in the New Testament, and this reads, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, it will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." This verse, no matter if you believe in a God or not, is all about reframing thoughts and the situations life brings you. In other words, trials can bring triumph, and there is power in exchanging troubles for trust in something greater than ourselves. COVID had some really annoying aspects. One was getting tested. As we all know, in order to do anything, we had to get tested. But this kind of reminds me about what life really is. In life, we get tested all the time. And what did we do when we were scheduled to get tested? We showed up. Everyone tuning in, we too will be tested beyond COVID. Every day we are tested in one way or the other. Like this, we need to show up every day to become the best possible version of ourselves. Showing up for me was learning to let go of past things, which was helpful for my anxiety and depression. Life is a lot easier when you don't try to impose your own structure on the day. Live and let live. Something I used to worry about all the time was what other people thought of me. Maybe if I worried about it just a little bit more, everyone would like me. Somehow I needed to prove myself to everyone that I was good enough, really work for it. I gradually realized that no matter who you are, 10% of people will not like you. But we need to focus on the 90% that does. And everyone truly has nothing to prove, only to share. I also just recently learned from church, which I started attending more, is that every one of us sees things through a filter, and sometimes that filter is broken. For example, if I go to a party and I'm super excited to see one of my friends, someone I've always been there for, really just help them out, I walk in and they don't really acknowledge my presence, they kind of look the other way, and I would really take that personally and think, wow, I've done a lot for this person, what did I do wrong? Like, they must hate me, what's going on? When in reality, that person probably wasn't even wearing contacts that day. And I continued to pray for my higher power or God to remove those filters and really not fall down the rabbit hole, as I like to say. Living in the past caused a lot of depression, and worrying about the future gave me anxiety. And so I eventually learned to live in the present and move with the rhythm of reality. I'm going to read you guys a meditation, which is titled Life Moves Forward. The past is past, over, finished. Our job is to move with the flow of the present. We are propelled by what went before, but we do not try to swim against the current of our present lives by regretting or yearning for old times, or worrying about it. Every day of recovery releases us from the past and gives us a fresh start. We can put behind us the misery of compulsive behavior. We certainly don't yearn to re-experience that. But the good times of the past will stay in our memories, our minds, and to be focused on the present. Recovery also readies us for the future. We don't fear what lies ahead, since it is in the hands of our higher power. Our task is to earnestly seek to know and to do our higher power's will for us today, so that we will keep moving with the stream of goodness that winds through our lives. Trust and confidence support us as we face forward. God gave me an eating disorder, something I could recover from, so I could overcome it and share my journey with others. Although I would not wish it on my worst enemy, it has allowed me to find a strength I never knew existed. Now, as I keep moving forward, although every day is imperfect, I now have a quality of peace and happiness never before imagined, thanks to God, who I believe helped remove my anxiety, depression, and ed, my sponsor, EDA, therapist, my supportive treatment team, my family and friends, and my daily hard work. I'm proud to say that I will be graduating on time this Saturday, which I know not everyone with an eating disorder is that lucky. I have my dream job as a bike tour guide for the city of Chicago, and I intuitively respond to situations that used to baffle me. I'm more confident and I feel wise beyond my years. Also, something that is wise is our bodies, and I naturally just kind of reached my set-foot weight and accepted that this is where I need to be. One by one, the miracles have occurred, and it's freeing to be a little spontaneous, and I truly broke out of my shell. Coping skills that work for me include journaling. I love to write, quote therapy, and this includes having a motivation app that will send you little daily quotes, which is great. I also have quotes all over my room on sticky notes, which is really exciting. Every time I walk in, it's just a quote that's read at the perfect time, and it could be something that I read somewhere or something that someone's told me, so it's really, really great to keep those all in mind. Mantras, one of my best mantras, it's really silly but very simple and effective, is brain and breathe. Sometimes with my ADHD brain, I need to remind myself that I have a brain, so I'm like, all right, girl, you have a brain, and then breathe. I think breathing is so therapeutic, so important if you can connect back to the breath. So brain and breathe. Talking to my friends and family, showering, walking, dancing, and reading literature. And also recently found this other app called Faith Fit, where you can learn about God and the Bible while you work out, so how fun. As I continually share my story, I realize that freedom is contagious and that small steps can create big change. The meaning of life is to give life meaning, and the journey is the reward. Tending to your own mental health is an act of self-care. Somehow COVID-19 saved my life, and I'm sure others as well, and it's great to share my story with other people and give them hope that this global pandemic has been actually a time for spiritual growth for some, and I truly believe we have learned a lot from this and that a multitude of good things will come out of it. I now lead my own EDA meetings, and I love food. I eat when I'm hungry, and I stop when I'm moderately full, and I exercise for fun and for my higher power, not a punishment. I no longer wake up every morning struggling to get out of bed, and I know how to handle my anxious thoughts. Overall, just more at peace with the world. I no longer feel alone. People on my path are there for a reason. It's so freeing to look in the mirror and now have gratefulness for the skin I am in. I truly went through a transcendent transformation, knowing that God is in control and will always have my back. I wish the same transformation for you, as this is a time for revival.